a framework that I've kind of put together over the past couple of years to help me think about and focus on being a little bit more innovative. Then we'll talk about Airbnb and our history and how I think the framework fits in with things that we think about at Airbnb. So we'll start at the top here. What is innovation? I think the easiest way for me to describe it, over the past, couple of years, I think it's become an incredible buzzword. It's at the point now where innovation is kind of synonymous with being smart, with doing a great job. And I think that this does non-innovative things a big disservice. Innovation is amazing, but I think you can be really intelligent and not innovate. There's a time and a place for innovation, and when you want to kind of uncork the bottle and launch after something really transformational, innovation is what you want to go after. But I also wanted to preface the conversation with the point that you don't always want to be innovative. And I think it's a word that is really, really, really overused, and I'll probably stop talking about that now and launch into the buzzword itself. So if you look it up in a dictionary, this is what you get. The act or process of introducing new ideas, devices, or methods. This is why I don't really read dictionaries so much anymore. It's a hyper-ambiguous term. I tend to think about innovation by comparing it and contrasting it to invention. And I think that these two things are fundamentally very different. Invention is really creating something brand new, something that nobody has really seen before. On the flip side, innovation is about introducing a new direction in a product or a process or a service that already exists. I also want to point out that I think innovation is not magic. Innovation is one of these things where by the time it comes to market and it becomes mainstream, it seems so incredibly obvious. And I think that that makes it look like it's incredibly hard to do, and it is difficult. But a lot of times when I'm talking to people about innovation, they seem to give off this sense that it's kind of unattainable for them. It's something that only like a Steve Jobs, who has, obviously is quite a bright guy, or was quite a bright guy, and has limitless resources behind him, he's the only kind of person that can really truly innovate. I think that this is fundamentally not true. I think anyone at any company of any size working on almost any problem can choose to approach it in an innovative direction. And I think that it all starts with asking questions. At the heart of basically every great innovation, usually, in my opinion, is a really phenomenal question. And I picked the slide background here on purpose because I think kids are actually the perfect example of how to be innovative. They constantly come up with really unique ideas. They're not always good ideas, but they're usually pretty unique and what I would traditionally call pretty innovative. The reason why is because they spend a lot less time than we do now thinking about what's possible. They spend more time thinking about what would be really interesting or what would be really cool, and they're constantly asking why. And so I think if you really want to think about being more innovative, the best place you can start is by asking a lot of questions. The trick is you can't ask any question. You need to find the one that nobody else is really asking today, and this is incredibly difficult. So where innovation is definitely not magic, the flip side to that is it's definitely not easy. This is not an easy process to go through. So I thought we'd start right here, and just as a quick FYI for the guys at the booth, the next slide isn't coming up here, so I'll hopefully not jump all over my feet here. But I thought it'd be good to dive into what I mean when I talk about asking the right questions. So I fundamentally believe that, now I have the wrong notes here, maybe we can back that up one. We're getting innovative around the slide deck. Should have just not said anything at all. So I think that there are actually two very different kinds of questions. There's conventional and there are innovative questions. And I think that the act of asking one of these two different kinds of questions actually in a certain way dictates the result that you're going to get. So we'll unpack this idea with two examples. I figured we're starting by having a conversation about innovation at a Rogers conference, so why not talk about the cell phone? Just for fun, how many people own one of these phones? You're going to date yourself, it's okay. How many people have never seen one of these phones in real life? Yeah. How many people only recognize this from Zach Morris? There you go, how much things change. So, if you think about the cell phone, a conventional or an intelligent question that you might ask would be one like this: how can we make a better mobile phone? This is the kind of question that engineers have been working on answering for basically forever. I'm an engineer by training, and having gone through engineering school, this is exactly what engineers learn to do, and these are the kinds of questions that they excel at. So if you ask this question over time, this is the kind of thing that you get. How many people recognize this phone or own a phone that looks something like this? A little bit of a different show of hands. You get a phone that is basically in every appreciable way substantially better than the big brick phone that nobody really has ever used before. It has great battery life, it fits in my pocket, it looks so much better. But I would argue that what you have here is kind of incremental improvement rather than a breakaway innovation. The conventional questioning unquestionably improved this phone, but at the end of the day, it was still a phone. If you take a big step back and you look at this phone and you compare it to the brick phone from earlier, they're fundamentally not that different. This one's cooler and looks better, but the keypad is exactly the same. It has the same green and red call and hang up button. It's not, in my opinion, all that innovative. The result was set up because of the question that was asked: how do we improve the phone? On the flip side, we can think about an innovative question. And for this, I'll tell you a story about Apple. A colleague of mine is a pretty tenured employee over at Apple, and he told me this story, and I trust him, otherwise I'm about to lie to a room full of people, and let's hope that I'm not about to do that. So right around the time that Apple was incredibly successful with the iPod, they were thinking about what was going to be next. And a lot of people think that they were planning the iPhone right away. They weren't. They were working away on a tablet computer, what has become the iPad. And they had this fundamental problem, and the problem was that to create the device that they wanted, they couldn't get the cost of the screen down to a level that they thought people would pay. Now for Apple to hit pause and say, hang on a second, our customers are not going to pay as much money as we want them to, means that it really had to be expensive. And they were expecting about a cost of around $10,000 for what eventually became the iPad. So luckily, in their infinite wisdom, Apple realized, we probably can't ask people to pay $10,000 for a tablet. Luckily, I guess Steve Jobs agreed, and they realized they had to figure something out. And so as the story was told to me, they're sitting in a room, and the engineers prattling on, as engineers sometimes tend to do, about how there's no way that they're going to reduce the cost of this screen. And Steve Jobs interrupts, and he says, how much would it cost for a screen that's roughly this size? Now, this obviously is the question that led to the creation of the iPhone. And the reason why I think that this is such a truly brilliant question is he wasn't asking about how to improve the phone, he was asking about how to shrink the tablet, how to put the power of a computer in your pocket. And if you ask this kind of question, and you put a team of really smart people to try to solve it, this is what you wind up with. It's a fundamental shift in a product that existed in the market. Essentially, this is a computer that I can make calls from. The reason why I think you can't ask the conventional question and try to get to this point is that if you do, you probably decide not to go this direction. How many people owned the original iPhone? Anybody? So I had one as well. The battery life on mine was terrible. It drove me out of my mind, and I dropped it from 6 inches off the ground, and it shattered and didn't work after that. So it was not durable at all. But the point is that even though it under-indexed on what you traditionally would have thought of as a great phone, it way over-indexed on something completely fundamentally brand new. It basically changed the way that people were interacting with their phones. And basically what I think that this boils down to is that this brand new question fundamentally altered the industry. The goal was entirely different. The goal was not a better phone, the goal was a smaller computer. And it's changed the way that people have developed phones to the point where, just for fun, like how many people in the audience have a phone that has the original keypad on it? Anybody? Did we get one? Somebody's nervous to not put up their hand. It's all right, don't worry about it. You can talk to Rogers, I guess they're all around here, they can probably hook you up with a new phone. So if we compare the two questions side by side, a conventional question asks, how can we make a better mobile phone? Now, in my opinion, what this does is it actually sets you up for the result that we saw earlier. It confines the thinking to the status quo, because when you ask a question like this, inherently what you're saying is you understand what better means. What it generally does is it works you towards optimization. When you think about better, you take what you see today, you say, okay, this would be great if it was smaller. This would be great if it let me make calls more consistently. But again, that tends to produce optimizations. On the flip side, if you ask a more innovative question, how can I carry around the power of a computer in my pocket? That actually forces outside of the box thinking. You can't apply the same thinking and say, okay, well, how do I have a phone with a better battery life and wind up with the iPhone? They're two completely different streams of thought. The other big benefit of an innovative question is, in my experience, the innovative question is kind of like a flywheel. You ask one really brand new question, and as you go through the process of trying to solve this question, you wind up asking another innovative question and another innovative question, so that by the time you're done, there's this huge shift from where you are today against where you started. Conventional question, why doesn't everybody do it if it's as simple as the last 4 slides that I just put up? Pretty simple answer. It's really hard. And I think everybody knows that it's pretty hard, but I think it's the way that it's hard that's really important to point out. I'm a big advocate that if you take a group of smart people and you put them in a room and you give them a problem to solve, most times a group of smart people will be capable of solving that problem. The trick is in getting them to solve the right problem. And the reason why I think that innovation is so difficult is that, as I've mentioned, you can't apply the same conventional thinking and expect to get the innovative answer. It takes a fundamental shift in the way that you're thinking about the problem. So one of the reasons why I think that it's very hard to think in this way is that usually the conventional answer is the one that feels the most comfortable. You might have a really crazy idea about your business that you want to try, that you're really passionate about, that you think is going to be successful. But the conventional approach almost always feels right, because you probably have a bias. You understand the approach to take on the conventional angle to get to the conventional result. The people around you, when you talk to them about it, are probably thinking about similar things. So to break outside of that bias and to think in a new way is really, really difficult. So over the last, I don't know how many years, as I've been kind of watching and working with a variety of different innovative companies, I really wanted to come up with a way, kind of a framework that I could use to help me understand when myself and my team is trying to innovate, but is actually thinking in a conventional way, because as I mentioned, I don't think that you're going to wind up with the result that you want that way. Again, this is kind of just a guideline that I've put together. Would love to hear feedback from anybody afterwards if they've had a different experience. I'm constantly kind of innovating on this framework. It changes probably once every 3 or 4 months, but hopefully you'll find it interesting. So I think it starts here, as I mentioned, with the question. And I think the first step you always want to do is to try to ask a new question, something that's going to completely reframe the problem for you. It's really easy to sit in a room and ask, how are we going to make this thing better? It's really difficult to sit in that same room and figure out a question that's going to shift you in a completely different direction. There are some things you can do here. I think specifically what-if questions are fantastic. What if the product was actually capable of something else? What if the problem we're trying to solve is actually this totally different question over here? If you ask this question, and then you follow it kind of through the steps to come up with a solution, in my experience, you almost always come up with some really interesting and novel thinking. Now, whether or not that novel thinking is helpful for your business, that will be up to you to figure out. The second piece is to imagine the world as you want it to be, and then work towards it with data. To assume that this idea that you have is actually going to be possible is going to require you to build out a vision. But it's very easy to get caught in the trap of just constant innovation for the sake of innovation. And the way that I think you get out of that trap is with data. You want to develop some very clear metrics that you're going to track along the way, and then you want to track those things ruthlessly. And the last, and by far and away my favorite, is to fail as often as you possibly can. And I'm great at failing, so. A lot of people, I think, have an inherent fear of failure. I would actually argue that it's better to fear not failing at all. So when my team is banging away at something at Airbnb and we're trying to kick the curve and grow at something very specific, and we haven't actually failed at anything for a while, that's when I start to get really nervous. Because I feel that we're not actually operating at the peak of what we can truly accomplish. Now, obviously, we're not looking for big business-crippling failures, but we are looking to learn from our mistakes as we're moving along. And so I'm actually using failure as a guidepost for whether we're thinking big enough and trying enough stuff outside of what feels like the norm. And the last piece is less of a guideline, more of maybe just a call out, and that's that innovation can come in absolutely all sizes. I think, like I mentioned earlier, there's this general sense that it can only come from big, giant companies. I don't think that you have to create innovation that's going to change the world. I believe you can use this process to innovate in everything that you're doing at any company, at basically any level. It's great for reimagining a marketing campaign that you're working on, or thinking about how you want to set up your goals for the upcoming year. The key, I think, is to build a muscle memory so that in your day-to-day, when you're working through the conventional approach and you realize that it's time to do something innovative, you can break outside of the status quo thinking and really drive towards some transformational results. Clicker failure? Nope. User error. So I thought we'd use a really, what seems like a very mundane example. So people talk about innovation and you think about the iPhone. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk about an experience I had and how innovation can be applied to something as simple as setting up your goals for the year. So this is something I did in my first month at Airbnb. I sat down and I thought about what we were going to achieve for the year in Canada. And I took a very conventional approach. I did what most people do. I thought about the tactics that we were going to run throughout the year. And by the way, this graph is totally for illustrative purposes. It's just because as an engineer, if there isn't a graph in a presentation, I get a little bit nervous, but it's just to illustrate the idea. So I thought about some tactics and what I thought they were going to be able to achieve. And out of this, I came up with an end-of-year goal. So probably everybody in this room has done an activity like this for their business. Then what I did is another conventional approach. I thought, well, I'm going to hire a pretty solid team, and I'm going to push them pretty hard, and we're going to be pretty smart. And so I'm going to take what I think is reasonable, and I'm going to add an aggressive goal on top of that. And some people call this a stretch goal. I see a lot of heads nodding, so probably everybody has done something like this. The thing that I didn't realize is that I was putting myself in a box of basically being able to achieve good, or if I was lucky, really great results, which there's nothing wrong with. But I learned very early on at Airbnb that if you produce good or great results, they show you the door. We're aiming for much larger transformational shifts. And so I packaged up the plan, and I flew down to our headquarters in San Francisco. We went through the plan together. It was a great conversation. And I got one question that stuck out in my mind. And the question that I got was from a very senior person at the company, one of the founders. And he asked me, what would you do differently in your plan if I told you that you had to do 10 times these results? And I remember thinking, like, the thought must have gone through my head in a half second. I thought, that's not possible. This guy's asking me a crazy question. On to the next thing. But I remember sitting on the airplane on the way home, and something clicked in my head. And I asked, well, what if? What if it was actually possible to 10x? What if my bias is stuck in there, and I feel that it's not, but I don't know, maybe 100x is possible. What would I actually do differently? So I got home, and I rejigged the entire plan, and I put it on a scale of what 10x would look like. And it looks like this. And the first thing that I noticed is that if I was able to 10x, and 10x was truly possible, this aggressive goal that I had created was actually totally inconsequential to what we were going to be able to achieve. So the first step after looking at something like this was asking this reframing question. And the next step was to figure out what I was going to do. So I worked my way backwards, and instead of going front to back, even though the slide goes this way, we went the other direction. And I thought, if 10x is truly possible, what am I going to do differently? What's my next step going to be? The result is I threw out about 95% of the plan. It basically entirely reframed for me the way that I was evaluating opportunities. Things that I thought made sense had no place in a plan that required me to 10x. Now, the great thing about a plan like this is that if you set it up this way, even if you don't hit this crazy innovative goal, even if you do 50% of it or 25% of it, odds are you're going to significantly outperform this conventional aggressive goal. And if I had approached it in the same conventional way that I have done that time and time again in my career, there's no way that I would have been able to achieve this. Now, we didn't hit the 10x goal, but we got very close. And the delta between what we were able to do and the aggressive goal that I thought was the peak of what was possible is absolutely massive. And the whole thing shifted from asking one single question. So I thought we'd stop talking about innovation from a high level now and jump into who and what we are at Airbnb, and then we'll go full circle and look at the framework and how it applies to the company. Sweet, I have a timer now. So Airbnb was founded by these three guys, Nate, Joe, and Brian, in San Francisco in 2007. And this is their apartment, the brown one. If you think that the cost of living and house prices are nuts in Toronto, I would encourage you to check out San Francisco. It'll make you feel great. Real estate is cheap here in comparison. So Nate, Joe, and Brian had a whole bunch of bills piling up, like a lot of people do. And they got a phone call one day from their landlord, and their landlord said, I'm going to raise rent at the end of the month. And they realized that there's no way that they're going to be able to make ends meet, and they're going to lose this apartment that they loved. So where a lot of businesses are started because somebody recognizes a need for something in a market, Nate, Joe, and Brian needed money. And so they asked themselves a pretty new question out of necessity, and that question was, the only thing we have in this world is our apartment, how are we going to make some more money so we can keep it? And so they sat around their apartment, and this is a photo of their apartment from 2007, and I always say thanks to them for taking a picture of their apartment so that I can use it in the presentation. It was very forward thinking of them. And what they realized is that there was nobody on the floor over here, and there was nobody sleeping on the couch, and there was some space over by the fireplace. They had some air beds in the closet, and they could probably hack together breakfast for somebody. And out of this, the incredibly creatively named Air Bed and Breakfast was born. And this is what the site looked like when it launched back in 2007, and we've been kind of innovating our way along from there. I'd like to pause here just to talk about the origins of Airbnb. The way that we've grown, a lot of people tend to think about Airbnb entirely as a travel company. And obviously, travel is a huge part of what we do. But the company was created for hosting. It was to give people a way to open up their homes to travelers from all around the world and earn a bit of extra income while they were doing so. We asked fundamentally a different question. And so how does this fit into the framework that I've been working on? Obviously it's going to fit, or this wouldn't be much of a good talk, but the thing to point out is it never works out this way as you're going through it. The reason why I like having this framework is it helps kind of nudge you along as you're working through. Obviously we've pivoted and we've shifted, but I think that these three tenets have stayed true with the company over the years. So the first was to ask a new question. This is our mission statement at Airbnb, more or less, in question format. Our goal is to create a world where you feel like you can belong anywhere that you go. When you travel somewhere, we don't want you to feel like you're staying there. We want you to feel like you're living there. We basically want you to experience it as if you've been living in the city your whole life. This is a really transformational question, and it seems so simple, but it is this question that drives everything that we do at the company. It causes us to approach things completely different from others, and I think it applies equally to how we do partnerships, all the way through to how we develop an app. And so I wanted to come up with a way to demonstrate this a little bit more visually. If you think about the traditional accommodation space, these are the three largest players. They have about 2.2 million hotel rooms around the world. This is us at Airbnb. We have about 2.2 million places that you can stay at all around the world. So they seem very similar on the surface. The difference is that these 2.2 million hotel rooms represents 14% of the 16 million hotel rooms all around the world, a pretty big percentage. The 2.2 million homes, this represents just 0.1% of the 2.2 billion homes all around the world. Now this seems like a nuance, but at our core, we're fundamentally asking different questions and we're solving completely different problems. So the second was to imagine the world as you want it to be and then use data to work towards it. See how that applies. So we understand the vision. We want to have people all around the world opening up their doors to travelers. This is a map of the world with hosting overlaid over the top. Because we're a bit of a bigger company now, we probably have 200-300 metrics that we're tracking on a regular basis. This is one of the most important ones. So here you can see over time how the number of people hosting all around the world has been increasing. 2014, 2015, to the point where today we have 2.2 million homes in 34,000 cities in 191 countries. Skipped ahead of one, but the point of that particular slide was just to show that like the growth has obviously been amazing. I don't know that anybody would have predicted this when Airbnb got started, but the way that it's okay, don't. Cool. Thanks, guys. But the way that we basically have gotten here is by having this vision, and the vision can apply to anything. In this case, it was to people hosting, and then staying true to this with data, and we honestly track where people are hosting very, very, very rigorously at the company to help us get to this amazing achievement. So back to my favorite one, failing as often as you can. I think this idea of embracing failure is incredibly important. A lot of people talk about it. It is incredibly difficult to truly embrace failure. We try to remember that everybody at the company is very strong, but that even strong people will make mistakes. The key is making sure that there are always learnings. So to demonstrate this, I wanted to find some data from back before Airbnb was as big as it was. Back in 2008, I think we maybe had a couple of hosts in New York. We were a much smaller company. This is a graph of website traffic in 2008. And so you see this huge uptick because they were tracking the data. And you might think at this point, okay, we're done, we can pack it in, the company's successful. But you keep tracking the data, and you see this. So for those of you that are not working in a startup, this is what's commonly referred to as the trough of sorrow. When things go in the wrong direction. You obviously don't want to see this. That's not a number that anybody would be super happy about. But in my opinion, the only thing worse than this is not seeing it at all. Because if you know that this problem exists and you're tracking it, then you can do something to try to turn it around in the other direction. That's the mentality we've used, and I wanted to illustrate how I think we've turned things around. Similar map of the world. This shows people traveling, and you can see over time, as more and more people are traveling around the world and staying in other people's homes as they do so. We've had over 100 million people stay in other people's homes all around the world. Now, the two things I wanted to point out here with a slide like this, the first is that a big fancy slide that shows 100 million on it never shows all the failures and learnings that went into it, and they are many. None of this would have happened without the trough of sorrow in 2008, and we've probably had no less than 50 or 60 of those since then. The failures, I can't stress enough, are a huge, huge component of getting to a number like 100 million. The second is that I'm very fortunate to work for a company like Airbnb where we have a big data science team and they can build these beautiful visualizations for us. But they're absolutely not required. It really doesn't matter whether you're a tiny one-person company and you're tracking this kind of stuff in an Excel spreadsheet, or you have a team of 50 people that can make these beautiful diagrams. The key is really just having a mentality that you want to be tracking it with data. You don't want to be turning a blind eye away from the negative results. Those are the ones that help you learn. And this idea of really truly embracing the failures as you go. So obviously, I'm still learning every day. That's what gets me up out of bed every morning. The framework is definitely far from complete. I don't know that it ever will be, or that that's even the point of it. But I have found it very useful to kind of kick my thinking into a different gear. Anytime that I feel like myself or my team is looking for innovation but thinking very conventionally, I always start by trying to ask new questions. Then we imagine a big vision, and we're ruthless with the data as we track towards it. And like I said, my favorite piece is to fail as often as possible. I think a really strong rule here is that if you're thinking really big and you're tracking really small, failures kind of become the guideposts on the way to success. Failure is actually the tool that I use to figure out whether or not we are being ambitious enough in the work that we're doing business. Kind of a different way to think about making these mistakes. Be quick, awesome. So I think that developing this muscle memory of being conventional when you need to be, but then when the time is right to be really innovative, you have the ability to knock yourself outside of that conventional thinking and really start thinking in a more innovative fashion. I think it all comes down to asking the right question. If you leave with nothing else today, hopefully it's this. I know that it might seem really sappy, but I firmly believe, and I've seen this happen firsthand, that the right question can fundamentally alter your business. It can change the entire industry that your business is operating in. And if you're really, really lucky, it can change the entire world. I think the key points here are to think big, remove your biases. I've cheated myself a number of times in the past without even knowing it, just by asking the wrong question up front. Whether or not it works for you, I'd love to hear your feedback. I think we're going to do questions now, but I'll be sticking around for a bit afterwards and would love to hear if you've had a different experience with innovation. Thanks a ton.